My parents let a stranger sleep in my dead brother's bed and wear his clothes because they needed to move on. When I begged them to come to Arthur's memorial instead of Harley's banquet, Mom said we needed to focus on living children now. I didn't say a word. That was 9 months ago. Yesterday, she sat at the kitchen table staring at his photo and didn't speak for hours. God, I don't even know where to start with this mess. My brother Arthur died 6 months ago in a car accident, and my parents just replaced him like he was a broken appliance they could swap out for a newer model. They met Harley at grief counseling, where he gave this tearful speech about losing his parents in the exact same intersection that culled my brother. Same age, different outcome, and Mom kept calling it fate, while Dad nodded desperately. So broken he'd have adopted anyone who could fill the Arthur-shaped hole in our house. The social worker fast-tracked everything because Harley's distant relatives were eager to dump responsibility, and within 3 weeks this complete stranger was sleeping in Arthur's bed, wearing his clothes, while my parents acted like they'd won the parenting lottery. I watched them systematically erase my brother, boxing up Arthur's music awards to make room for Harley's honor roll certificates, and when I'd mention Arthur at dinner, they'd immediately pivot to Harley's college prospects or academic achievements. So I started hoarding Arthur's guitar picks and demo recordings in my room. They were becoming the only proof my brother ever existed. Here's what made me physically sick. Harley was everything my parents wished Arthur had been. Polite where Arthur was sarcastic. Straight A student where Arthur was a garage band dropout who with a D average. And they bought Harley designer clothes while Arthur had lived his entire life in thrift store finds. The favoritism so blatant it was like a slap in the face. But Harley wasn't the perfect angel he pretended to be. I caught him studying our family photos with this weird, calculating intensity, asking oddly specific questions about the accident. What hospital? Exact time of impact? Which lane Dad was driving in? The breaking point came when Arthur's old band invited me to perform his original song at a memorial concert. Of course, the same night as Harley's academic banquet. And when I begged my parents to skip the banquet for once, Mom said we needed to focus on living children now, while Dad agreed Harley deserved recognition, saying Arthur never took school seriously anyway. That night, I found Harley sitting in my room, casually flipping through Arthur's songwriting journals that I'd hidden in my closet. And when I demanded he give them back, he shrugged without looking up, saying, "Your parents gave me everything else. Why should these be different?" When I protested that they weren't his to take, his friendly mask finally cracked, something cold flickering behind his eyes as he asked, "Who do you think they'll believe? The broken girl who can't move on from her dead brother, or the son who actually makes them proud?" Later, I heard my parents in the kitchen, Mom sobbing that Harley helped her pretend Arthur never died, while Dad said maybe that was good. At least one of our kids turned out right. 3 days later, Harley made his big announcement. He'd been accepted to an elite music conservatory using Arthur's songs in his application portfolio, telling my devastated parents he was finally honoring Arthur's memory properly. That's when my parents dropped an even bigger bomb. They were officially going to put Harley into their will and give him all the money they had saved for Arthur College Fund. They said he deserved it and might actually make good use of the funds, unlike some. After he left for orientation, I went to clean out his room and found a notebook that had fallen behind the dresser, my hands shaking as I opened it to find notes on gaining our trust and random facts about Arthur. He rambled on for pages and pages, saying, "Let them realize what they lost. Their dad ran a red light and caused my parents' accident. They got to keep one child while I lost everything. They don't deserve happiness. They don't deserve peace. They deserve to lose everything twice." My blood turned to ice because this wasn't some grief-stricken orphan looking for a family. This was calculated, methodical revenge. And downstairs, my oblivious parents were already planning to make Harley one of their heirs. I sat frozen holding the notebook as Harley's voice carried upstairs, cheerful and casual like he hadn't just left for orientation yesterday. My heart hammered against my ribs. He was supposed to be gone for a week, but here he was, explaining to my parents how the conservatory had shortened orientation for winter break. My hands trembled as I shoved the notebook under my mattress. The floorboards creaked outside my door. I barely had time to grab my phone and pretend to scroll through it before Harley appeared in my doorway. That perfect smile plastered across his face. He stepped into my room without invitation, his eyes scanning methodically. They lingered on my desk where I'd been sitting, then moved to my closet door which hung slightly ajar. His smile never wavered, but something sharp flickered behind his eyes. He asked if I'd been looking for something while unpacking, his tone conversational but waited. My throat went dry. I stammered something about needing a phone charger, the lie falling flat between us. Harley reached into his pocket and offered me his own charger, that strange smile widening. The gesture should have been helpful, but something about it made my skin crawl. I couldn't articulate why his helpfulness felt like a threat. At dinner, Harley mentioned I'd seemed stressed when he got home. My parents' attention immediately snapped to me, Mom's forehead creasing with concern. Dad set down his fork, both of them studying my face for signs of the fragility they'd been monitoring since Arthur's death. Neither asked why Harley had returned early from his prestigious orientation. They only wanted to know if I was having another episode. After dinner, I excused myself to retrieve the notebook, planning to photograph the pages as evidence. My fingers fumbled under the mattress, finding the spiral binding, but when I pulled it out, my stomach dropped. The pages I'd read, the ones detailing his revenge plan, had been torn out. Only blank sheets remained. The jagged edges where pages had been ripped away mocked me. He must have found my hiding spot while the family was at the grocery store that afternoon. Mom knocked on my door, entering without waiting for permission. She and Dad had been talking, she said, and they thought I needed a break from stress. She held out her hand for my phone, explaining it would help me disconnect and focus on healing. The word temporarily hung in the air like a lie we all recognized. I had no choice but to hand it over, watching my last connection to the outside world disappear into her pocket. Over the next few days, I noticed subtle changes in my room. My hidden stash of Arthur's memorabilia had been disturbed. The guitar picks weren't in the same order. His demo CD had been moved slightly to the left. Someone had been through my things with careful, deliberate attention. Harley had access to the house while we were at the grocery store, and he'd used it. Family movie night arrived with its forced normalcy. Harley chose the film, some drama about family bonds. Halfway through, he mentioned having weird dreams about car accidents lately. His voice carried just the right amount of vulnerability as he asked detailed questions about the night Arthur died. What time exactly? Which hospital did they take him to? Did anyone see the actual moment of impact? My obvious discomfort made my parents exchange worried looks. Mom reached over to squeeze my hand while Dad suggested we change the subject, but Harley pressed on, wondering aloud if trauma could be inherited, if families were destined to repeat patterns. Each question felt like a scalpel, precisely cutting at our barely healed wounds. Emma visited the next day, one of the few friends my parents still allowed to see me. We sat in my room, and she nervously revealed that Harley had called her. He was concerned about my obsession with conspiracy theories, worried I was spiraling into paranoia. The worst part was how reasonable he'd sounded, how caring. Emma didn't say she believed him, but doubt clouded her eyes. I convinced Emma to let me borrow her phone for just a minute, claiming I needed to check my email for school. Instead, I quickly photographed what remained of Harley's notebook, the blank pages with their telltale torn edges. I hid her phone in my school locker afterward, planning to retrieve it later. The battery was at 12%, but it was better than nothing. The next morning, the school counselor pulled me from class. My parents had received a concerning call from her office. Harley, the worried brother, had reached out about my behavior. He'd painted a picture of a girl lost in grief, creating elaborate fantasies to cope with loss. The counselor's eyes held that familiar mix of pity and professional distance as she asked how I was really doing. January arrived with mandatory family therapy sessions. The therapist, a soft-spoken woman with careful eyes, immediately validated Harley's concerns about my unhealthy grieving process. He sat there looking appropriately troubled, occasionally reaching over to pat my hand in a show of brotherly support that made my skin crawl. During one session, I made the mistake of checking the family iPad while my parents were distracted. My heart sank as I discovered a text thread where Harley had been systematically planting seeds about my instability with extended family. The messages dated back months, sent during his brief holiday break visits home. Aunt Janet thought I needed professional help. Uncle Mike worried about my fixation on the past. Cousin Sarah suggested an intervention. My attempt to email Arthur's bandmates failed when I discovered new parental controls on our home Wi-Fi. Harley had helpfully suggested them to my parents, explaining how the internet could fuel unhealthy obsessions. He'd even offered to set them up himself, ensuring I couldn't reach anyone who might believe me. Work became another battlefield. My manager at the local bookstore reduced my hours after receiving a concerned call about my episodes affecting work performance. Harley had struck again, his worry for his troubled sister touching everyone who heard it. My coworkers now watched me with careful eyes, ready to report any signs of the instability he'd warned them about. The school counselor dismissed my concerns when I tried to explain. Harley had volunteered to join the peer grief counseling group, positioning himself as the one working through trauma in healthy ways while I remained stuck. His performance was flawless, tears at just the right moments, wisdom beyond his years when discussing loss. One evening, I overheard Harley on the phone in his room. Fragments drifted through the wall. Timeline, paperwork, benefits. My pulse quickened, but I couldn't make out the complete context. When I mentioned it at dinner, suggesting he was planning something, Harley's explanation came smooth and prepared. He'd been talking to a social worker about survivor benefits, trying to understand what support was available for orphans like him. My parents praised his maturity while shooting me warning looks about my paranoia. Derek from Arthur's band reached out through a mutual friend, having noticed something odd. Harley had been posting covers of Arthur's songs on social media with subtle credit suggestions, implying collaboration that never existed. Derek wanted to meet. The realization hit me during another family dinner. Harley had been gradually repositioning himself as the stable child while I became the problem. Every concerned call, every worried observation, every gentle suggestion to my parents built his case. He was the son they deserved, while I was the broken daughter dragging them down. Derek agreed to meet me in the school parking lot during lunch. He revealed that Harley had friend requested all of Arthur's contacts months ago, systematically working through the list. We bonded over our shared frustration at adults not listening to teenagers, at how easily they dismissed our concerns as dramatic or attention-seeking. Derek pulled up screenshots on his phone. Months ago, shortly after connecting with Arthur's contacts, Harley had asked hypothetical questions about song copyrights. How did ownership work? What if someone died before registering their work? The questions seemed innocent unless you knew Harley now claimed co-writing credit on Arthur's best songs. Mrs. Chen, our elderly neighbor, stopped me as I walked home from school. She mentioned that Harley seemed very mature for his age, but something about his questions didn't sit right. He'd asked about our family's routines, when we were typically home, how often my parents traveled. She'd thought he was being a concerned son, but now she wondered. The unease in her eyes matched my own. February brought a false spring that melted the snow, but not the ice forming around my life. Harley's next move came during breakfast when he reached into the coat closet and pulled out Arthur's leather jacket, the one with the band patches Mom had threatened to throw away countless times. He held it up with practiced confusion, then reached into my backpack sitting by the door and dramatically discovered it tucked inside. Mom's coffee mug froze halfway to her lips. Dad's newspaper crinkled as he lowered it. Harley's performance was flawless, his voice carrying just the right mix of concern and reluctance, as he suggested I might be stealing memories because I couldn't let go. Those exact words from our last therapy session, when Dad had worried about me hoarding Arthur's things. I recognized the trap immediately. Denying it would look defensive. Explaining would sound like excuses. So I simply took the jacket from his hands and hung it back in the closet. My movements calm despite the rage burning in my chest. But the damage was done. Mom's eyes followed me with fresh worry, and Dad made a note in his phone, probably scheduling another therapy appointment. Mrs. Chen caught me taking out the trash that evening. She glanced around nervously before leaning close, her weathered hands trembling slightly. She'd seen Harley sitting in his car before grief counseling meetings, she whispered, practicing facial expressions in the rearview mirror. Cycling through grief, pain, hope, vulnerability like an actor preparing for a role. She'd thought it strange at the time, but hadn't wanted to judge how people process trauma. Now she wondered if she should have said something sooner. School became my only refuge, though even that was compromised. Derek had refused Harley's Facebook friend request after my warning, and the rejection had consequences. We passed Harley in the hallway between classes, and for just a moment, his mask slipped. The friendly exterior cracked, revealing something cold and calculating underneath. His jaw tightened, his eyes narrowed, and his hands clenched into fists before he caught himself and reconstructed the pleasant smile. Derek noticed too, his step faltering beside me. The school library still had computers without parental controls, and I used my study period to create a secret email account. I named it after one of Arthur's song lyrics, something Harley wouldn't recognize. Slowly, carefully, I began documenting everything. The timeline of Harley's appearance in our lives, the systematic way he'd inserted himself into every aspect of our family, the pattern of isolation he'd created around me. My documentation efforts hit a wall when I tried to involve authorities. The school resource officer listened politely, but explained this was clearly a family therapy issue, not a legal matter. The local police station directed me to family services. Family services suggested professional mediation. Every door I knocked on opened to the same response, a troubled teen struggling with grief and adjustment. Harley had painted the picture too well. Derek became my lifeline. We met during lunch, sharing memories of Arthur that Harley couldn't possibly know. The way Arthur always tapped his left foot during guitar solos. How he'd eat his sandwich fillings separately, saving the bread for last. The inside jokes from years of friendship that no amount of social media stalking could reveal. These details became our authentication system, proof that we held the real Arthur in our memories while Harley performed a hollow imitation. Spring break brought unexpected help. Derek's older sister Sarah, home from college, noticed our hushed conversations and cornered Derek for an explanation. A sociology major with access to her university's databases, she offered to help research Harley's background. What she found confirmed our suspicions, but raised new questions. The obituary for Harley's guardians showed they'd died in a car accident, but in a different state, at a different intersection than he'd claimed. The pattern became clear. Harley targeted families affected by car accidents, seeking something beyond simple adoption. I started responding differently to Harley's provocations. When he planted evidence, I calmly returned items to their places without comment. When he made concerned observations about my behavior at dinner, I thanked him for his worry and changed the subject. The shift unsettled him. He'd grown used to my emotional reactions, my desperate attempts to defend myself. This new composure disrupted his script. Mom noticed too. One evening, while washing dishes together, she quietly observed that I seemed more mature lately. The compliment was tentative, testing the waters of a relationship that had grown strained. I didn't push, didn't try to capitalize on the moment. I simply smiled and handed her another plate to dry. Harley's response to losing control was swift. He announced plans for an Arthur Memorial Scholarship, complete with fundraising goals and a timeline that would require significant family financial commitment by summer. He'd already designed promotional materials featuring Arthur's photo alongside his own, positioning himself as the grieving brother honoring a fallen sibling. The manipulation was breathtaking in its audacity. The music teacher, Mr. Peterson, unknowingly provided crucial evidence. During a casual conversation about the Memorial Scholarship, he mentioned how sophisticated Arthur's compositions had been. Complex chord progressions, layered harmonies, techniques that took years to develop. He spoke with professional admiration about songs Harley now claimed to have helped write. The contradiction was subtle but damning. Family game night revealed cracks in Harley's perfect son facade. While playing a trivia game, questions about the night of Arthur's accident came up naturally in conversation. Harley knew details he shouldn't. Specific medical terms from the hospital report, the exact time of impact, which emergency responders had arrived first. Information that we'd never discussed, that existed only in official documents. Dad's hand paused over the game pieces, his protective instincts finally stirring as he registered the impossibility of Harley's knowledge. The scholarship partnership offer came during a staged private moment. Harley cornered me in the garage while I was looking for camping gear, his voice dropping its usual warmth. He proposed a deal. Stop making the family uncomfortable with questions, and he'd make me co-chair of the Memorial Scholarship. We could honor Arthur together, he suggested, if I just stopped fighting the family's healing process. The threat underneath was clear. Refuse, and he'd escalate his campaign to destroy my credibility completely. I refused. Mom's questions started small, comments about how quickly the adoption had processed, observations about paperwork that seemed rushed in retrospect. She wasn't suspicious yet, just processing details that hadn't seemed important in the fog of grief. I carefully nurtured these seeds of doubt, never pushing too hard, letting her reach conclusions on her own. April brought warming weather and growing evidence. Sarah's research revealed digital footprints showing Harley had researched our family for months before that first grief counseling meeting. Social media searches, public records requests, a systematic investigation that predated his tearful introduction by nearly half a year. The meeting hadn't been fate, it had been targeted. I began to understand Harley's weakness. His influence worked primarily on grieving parents desperate for hope, but teachers, neighbors, and peers responded differently. Without the emotional vulnerability of loss, they saw the performance more clearly. The mask that fooled my parents appeared obviously artificial to those watching from a distance. Derek's evidence proved invaluable. He'd kept everything from Arthur's band days, including original demo recordings shared during practice sessions, files time-stamped months before Harley claimed any involvement, containing Arthur's distinctive guitar work and vocal arrangements. The smoking GN we'd needed to prove theft of intellectual property. Emma chose sides despite the social cost. Her parents pressured her to avoid our family drama, worried about being pulled into something messy, but she stood by me. Our investigation strengthening a friendship tested by months of isolation. We spent afternoons piecing together timelines, comparing notes, building an airtight case. The partnership refusal had consequences. Harley's tactics shifted from subtle to aggressive. He began contradicting his own stories during family dinners, forcing me to either expose the lies and look petty, or stay silent and let them stand. But I'd learned patience. I asked innocent follow-up questions that highlighted inconsistencies without direct confrontation. My parents started noticing the contradictions on their own. Derek compiled a comprehensive timeline of Arthur's songwriting process. Band practice videos showed Arthur alone at the piano, working through compositions Harley now claimed as collaborations. Dated footage that predated their supposed friendship by years. We organized everything into a clear narrative, preparing for the moment we'd need to present it. The grief counselor who'd championed Harley began pulling back. The timing of the inheritance announcement had raised red flags she couldn't ignore. Professional ethics prevented her from discussing specifics, but her increasing distance from our family spoke volumes. Harley's carefully cultivated support network showed its first cracks. 3 separate adults approached me with similar observations about Harley's behavior. Mr. Peterson mentioned the odd questions about copyright law. The mailman noted Harley's intense interest in our family's daily schedule. Mrs. Rodriguez from 2 houses down observed him photographing our home from various angles last fall. Individually, these seemed like quirks. Together, they painted a picture of surveillance and planning. I organized a small memorial gathering for Arthur at the local park. Nothing official, just friends sharing memories and music. Derek coordinated with the old band members while I spread word through Arthur's actual friends. Harley couldn't object without seeming petty, but his exclusion from the planning clearly bothered him. The confrontation came in private. Harley found me in the backyard, his usual warmth replaced by cold calculation. He'd noticed my changed behavior, my growing confidence. He suspected I'd found something but couldn't pinpoint what. His questions probed for weaknesses, testing what I knew without revealing his own hand. I gave him nothing, maintaining the same calm composure that had frustrated him for weeks. Mom's apology came unexpectedly. After witnessing Harley's coldness during a minor disagreement about household chores, she pulled me aside. She was sorry for not hearing me lately, she said, her voice thick with emotion she couldn't quite name. The maternal instinct that grief had suppressed was slowly awakening, recognizing something wrong even if she couldn't articulate what. The Memorial Scholarship hit its first major obstacle. The bank questioned the unusual timeline of inheritance and scholarship creation, flagging it for review. Harley's plan required quick access to Arthur's college fund, but financial institutions moved slowly, buying us precious time. Mrs. Chen's final revelation connected the remaining dots. Last fall, before the grief counseling meeting, Harley had approached her with detailed questions about our family, our routines, our relationships, our vulnerabilities. He'd claimed to be a journalism student writing about neighborhood communities, but his questions had felt invasive even then. She'd forgotten until seeing him move in, the memory jarring loose when she recognized his face. June brought summer heat and rising tension. During a family barbecue, my younger cousin started chattering about overhearing her parents discuss our family's finances. Harley leaned in with interest, asking follow-up questions that would have seemed innocent from anyone else. I smoothly redirected the conversation, protecting my cousin from becoming another source of information. The protective instinct felt natural, growth from months of defensive vigilance. Derek, Emma, and Sarah formed an unofficial support network. We met at the library, comparing notes and documenting patterns. Sarah's analytical mind proved invaluable, organizing our evidence into a coherent narrative that even skeptical adults couldn't dismiss. We were building something undeniable. Harley's attempt to discredit me with our therapist backfired spectacularly. His descriptions of my behavior included details he couldn't have known without surveillance, references to private conversations he hadn't been present for. The therapist's training in manipulation tactics kicked in, recognizing the red flags of a controlling personality. She didn't accuse him directly, but her questions grew more probing, less sympathetic. Dad's discovery happened by accident. He'd borrowed the family computer computer to check insurance documents and found Harley's browser history. Searches about life insurance policies, inheritance law, legal guardianship termination. Harley's quick explanation about a school research project felt hollow. Dad's expression thoughtful as he processed the implications. My consistent responses to provocation slowly rebuilt family credibility. Extended relatives who'd bought into Harley's narrative of my instability began questioning their assumptions. My calm demeanor at family gatherings contrasted sharply with the hysterical teenager he'd described. Doubt spread through whispered conversations and exchanged glances. Mr. Peterson offered an informal lesson on music copyright law, ostensibly for my own songwriting interests, but we both understood the real purpose. He explained how ownership worked, how posthumous rights transferred, how to prove original creation. Every word confirmed Arthur's legal ownership of the songs Harley had stolen. The anniversary dinner announcement created a countdown. Harley wanted to honor our parents' wedding anniversary with a family appreciation dinner, inviting extended family and close friends. The date gave us 6 weeks to prepare our own presentation. The stage was set for confrontation, but on Harley's terms, in his chosen venue. Emma's mother witnessed Harley's mask slip during a chance encounter at the grocery store. He'd been cordial until I walked away to get something from another aisle. Then his demeanor shifted, dismissive and cold as he warned her about enabling my delusions. The transformation was so stark that she called Emma immediately, disturbed by what she'd seen. I finally understood the cost of truth. Exposing Harley meant destroying the illusion my parents had built to survive their grief. It meant forcing them to face not just Arthur's death, but their own vulnerability to manipulation. The weight of that responsibility settled heavy on my shoulders, but I accepted it. Love sometimes required painful honesty. Harley's provocations grew desperate. He left Arthur's belongings in compromising locations, created scenarios designed to make me look unstable. But I'd learned his patterns. Each trap was met with calm documentation, every provocation handled with mature grace. My relatives noticed the growth, commenting on how well I was handling the family changes. 2 community members declined Harley's invitation to speak at the anniversary dinner. They cited scheduling conflicts, but the truth was clearer. His perfect son image had developed cracks they couldn't ignore. The network of support he'd cultivated was slowly unraveling. Derek convinced Arthur's former bandmates to attend the anniversary dinner. They'd bring the original recordings, the proof of Arthur's soul creation. The memorial tribute would become something more, a revelation wrapped in remembrance. We had our counterplan. My confidence grew with each piece of evidence assembled. The notebook remnants, the testimony of neighbors, the digital footprints, the stolen songs. It all painted an undeniable picture. We weren't just proving Harley's deception. We were preserving Arthur's true legacy. The fake message arrived through an old social media account, supposedly from Arthur, expressing disappointment in my behavior as a sister. The cruelty of using my dead brother's identity against me should have broken me. Instead, it became the final piece of evidence. I proved the account had been deactivated before the message date, the technical impossibility destroying Harley's latest manipulation. July's heat matched the intensity of our preparation. My parents' doubt had evolved from seeds to saplings, growing stronger with each inconsistency they noticed. They weren't ready to accept the truth yet, but they were beginning to question the narrative they desperately embraced. Derek and I grew closer through shared purpose. What started as alliance became genuine friendship, bonded by determination to honor Arthur's memory. We spent hours organizing evidence, practicing presentations, preparing for every possible counter-argument. Mr. Peterson agreed to attend the anniversary dinner. His offer to share memories of Arthur's musical talent came with understated support. An adult witness to corroborate our claims, his professional opinion carrying weight our teenage voices might lack. I prepared my presentation with meticulous care. Every claim supported by evidence, every accusation backed by proof. The narrative was simple, clear, undeniable. Harley had orchestrated an elaborate deception to steal not just Arthur's legacy, but our family's money and peace. His latest gaslighting attempt fell flat. My parents had witnessed too many small inconsistencies, noticed too many convenient explanations. When Harley tried to paint my evidence gathering as obsessive behavior, they exchanged glances that spoke volumes. The foundation of trust he'd built was crumbling. Mrs. Chen provided the final testimony, a detailed account of Harley's surveillance activities. She documented dates, times, specific questions asked. Her methodical nature, developed over decades of neighborhood watching, had created an inadvertent record of his preparations. The evidence was overwhelming. Harley's calculated infiltration of our family, his theft of Arthur's music, his systematic isolation of me, his financial motivations, all supported by documents, testimonies, and recordings. The truth had organized itself into an undeniable narrative. I presented everything to my parents in a private family meeting. The timeline, the recordings, the witness accounts, the proof of Arthur's sole authorship. I watched their faces crumble as illusion gave way to devastating reality. The child they'd embraced to ease their grief had been using that very grief against them. Harley's response was predictably manipulative. He claimed I'd falsified evidence, threatened to leave the family since I clearly hated him. The emotional blackmail might have worked months ago, but my parents had seen too much, noticed too many cracks in his perfect son performance. They wavered, torn between truth and the comfort of denial, but they didn't immediately take his side. The community reaction split predictably. Some believed Harley's claims of persecution, unable to see past the grieving orphan narrative, but Derek and Emma stood firm, their families beginning to understand the depth of deception we'd uncovered. The support network held despite pressure to abandon the uncomfortable truth. I faced potential isolation as even previously supportive adults questioned my motivations. The label of vindictive sister trying to destroy a grieving boy's new chance at family stuck to me like tar, but I'd made my choice. The anniversary dinner would be the venue for complete revelation, regardless of personal cost. Harley's most desperate manipulation came next. He threatened self-harm if the persecution continued, knowing my parents' terror of losing another child. The calculated cruelty of weaponizing their grief against them revealed the depth of his malice. But even this final card would fail against the evidence we'd assembled. Mrs. Chen's detailed account reached my mother during a chance encounter at the mailbox. The elderly woman handed over handwritten notes, dates, and times meticulously recorded in shaky cursive. Mom's hands trembled as she read through months of observations, her face paling with each revelation. She stumbled back inside, the papers clutched against her chest. The confrontation that followed shook our house. I watched from the stairs as Mom spread the notes across the kitchen table, Dad leaning over to read them. Harley maintained his composure initially, offering explanations for each documented incident, but the sheer volume of evidence overwhelmed his ability to spin convincing lies. His voice grew sharper, more defensive with each question. Dad's protective instincts finally overrode his grief-driven blindness. He demanded to see Harley's phone, his browser history, his social media accounts. The request triggered Harley's most dramatic performance yet. He collapsed into a chair, tears streaming down his face as he wailed about trust and family bonds. But something had shifted. My parents watched with analytical eyes rather than sympathetic ones. The anniversary dinner preparations continued despite the growing tension. Harley insisted on maintaining the facade, sending cheerful reminders to invited guests, but I noticed him making private calls, his voice low and urgent. Whatever backup plan he'd prepared was being activated. Derek arrived early on the day of the dinner, carrying a laptop loaded with evidence. Emma followed shortly after, her parents having finally agreed to let her support me. Sarah came too, armed with her research findings printed and organized into a presentation folder. We set up in my room, preparing for what felt like a final battle. Guests began arriving as the sun set. Extended family members filled our living room, their cheerful chatter a stark contrast to the tension crackling beneath the surface. Harley played the perfect host, greeting everyone with warm hugs and grateful smiles. But I caught him checking his phone repeatedly, his jaw tightening with each glance. The dinner itself proceeded with forced normalcy. Harley had strategically placed himself at the head of the table, my parents flanking him like guards. He'd prepared a touching speech about family and second chances, his voice breaking at just the right moments. Several relatives dabbed at their eyes, moved by his apparent sincerity. Mr. Peterson's arrival shifted the atmosphere. He carried a folder of his own, filled with Arthur's original compositions and detailed notes about their creation dates. Harley's smile faltered slightly as the music teacher took a seat directly across from him. The trap was set, though most guests remained oblivious. During dessert, Harley launched his preemptive strike. He stood, tapping his water glass for attention, and announced he had something difficult to share. His voice trembled as he described feeling unwelcome in our home, persecuted by a sister who couldn't accept her parents moving forward. He painted himself as a victim of grief-driven jealousy, forced to defend his place in a family that had chosen to love him. The performance was masterful. Aunt Janet shot me disapproving looks. Uncle Mike shook his head sadly. Even some of the neighbors seemed swayed by his emotional plea. But Derek was already connecting his laptop to our television, his fingers flying across the keyboard. The first video appeared on screen before Harley could react. Security footage from Mrs. Chen's doorbell camera, showing him practicing his grief-stricken expressions in our driveway. The timestamp proved it was taken before his first grief counseling meeting. Gasps rippled through the room as guests recognized the calculated nature of his deception. Emma took over, presenting the timeline we'd constructed. She showed Harley's digital footprint, the months of research into our family before his convenient appearance at grief counseling. Sarah followed with public records, proving his guardians had died in a different state, their accident unrelated to the intersection where Arthur died. Harley's mask cracked incrementally with each revelation. His attempts to interrupt were drowned out by the evidence pouring forth. Mr. Peterson stood, opening his folder to reveal Arthur's original sheet music, dated and notarized years before Harley claimed any involvement. He explained the sophisticated techniques Arthur had developed independently, impossible to fake or claim credit for posthumously. The room erupted when Derek played Arthur's demo recordings. My brother's distinctive voice filled the space, singing lyrics Harley had claimed to co-write. The timestamps on the files predated their supposed collaboration by years. Mom's hand flew to her mouth, tears streaming down her face as she heard Arthur's voice again, pure and unfiltered by Harley's lies. Harley's composure shattered completely. He lunged for Derek's laptop, trying to stop the presentation. Dad caught his arm, holding him back with surprising strength. The physical confrontation shocked our guests, destroying any remaining sympathy for the boy they'd believed was a grieving orphan. I pulled out the notebook pages I'd photographed, displaying them on my phone for everyone to see. Though the incriminating pages were gone, the jagged edges where they'd been torn out told their own story. I explained finding his revenge manifesto, his written admission that Dad had caused his parents' accident, his plan to destroy our family from within. The revelation about Dad's involvement in the accident sent shockwaves through the room. Dad himself went pale, his hands shaking as he processed this information. He'd never known the other car contained Harley's parents, the connection hidden by different last names and states. The weight of unintentional tragedy crashed over him, mixed with rage at being manipulated through his guilt. Harley's final attempt at control came through emotional manipulation. He grabbed a kitchen knife from the table, holding it to his own throat as he screamed about having nothing left to live for. But his eyes remained calculating, watching for our reactions. The theatrical nature of the gesture, so different from genuine despair, convinced the last doubters in the room. Mr. Peterson calmly approached Harley, his teacher's instincts kicking in. He spoke quietly about consequences and choices, maintaining eye contact while Derek called emergency services. Within minutes, Harley was being evaluated by professionals who recognized manipulation tactics from genuine crisis. His removal from our home happened quietly, without the drama he'd orchestrated for so long. The aftermath unfolded in waves. Relatives who'd been fooled expressed anger and embarrassment. Those who doubted me offered awkward apologies. The anniversary dinner became something entirely different, a reckoning with how grief could make people vulnerable to exploitation. Mom collapsed into Dad's arms, sobbing for both sons, the one she'd lost and the one who'd never existed. The illusion's destruction left a void almost as painful as Arthur's death, but this time, she had to face it without comfortable lies. Legal complexities emerged immediately. The adoption paperwork, the inheritance changes, the scholarship fund, all required untangling. A social worker arrived to manage Harley's case, explaining he'd be placed in appropriate care while authorities investigated his pattern of targeting grieving families. We weren't his first victims, just his most successful infiltration. Arthur's band performed an impromptu tribute in our backyard, his real friends playing his actual songs, with proper credit given to their true creator. The authentic memorial we'd needed all along, free from Harley's performative grief and stolen artistry. The house felt different with Harley gone. His room stood empty, Arthur's belongings slowly migrating back to their rightful place. But the damage went deeper than rearranged possessions. Trust had been shattered, vulnerabilities exposed, family bonds tested to their limits. Dad struggled most visibly with the revelation about the accident. Learning he'd unknowingly orphaned Harley while losing Arthur created a complex knot of guilt and anger. He started attending his own counseling sessions, working through trauma layers that Harley's manipulation had twisted into weapons. The financial untangling took weeks. Bank accounts needed closing, beneficiary forms required updating, the memorial scholarship had to be dissolved. Each step forward felt like admitting how thoroughly we'd been deceived. The money meant for Arthur's dreams would remain his, locked away until we could honor him properly. School became easier without Harley's influence poisoning my relationships. Teachers who doubted me acknowledged their mistakes. The counselor who dismissed my concerns implemented new protocols for verifying family dynamics. Small victories in a larger battle against manipulative behavior. Emma and Derek's support proved invaluable during the transition. They'd stood by me when adults wouldn't listen, their friendship forged through shared determination to expose the truth. We spent afternoons at the park where Arthur used to practice, sharing memories Harley could never steal or corrupt. Mom's journey back to authentic grief was painful to witness. Without Harley's comfortable fiction, she had to confront Arthur's actual death, his imperfections alongside his talents, the real boy she'd lost, not the idealized version Harley had reflected back at her. Some days she could barely leave her room, overwhelmed by compounded loss. Community response varied wildly. Some neighbors treated us with kid gloves, unsure how to interact after witnessing such spectacular deception. Others rallied around us, sharing their own stories of manipulation and recovery. Mrs. Chen became a regular visitor, her validation helping my parents understand how thoroughly they'd been targeted. The empty chair at dinner created its own presence. presence. Not Arthur's absence, which we'd learned to navigate, but Harley's void, a reminder of how desperate grief could make people. We ate mostly in silence those first weeks, each lost in private reckonings with our roles in enabling the deception. Cleaning out Harley's room revealed more evidence of his calculated infiltration. Notes about our habits, sketches of the house layout, printed articles about Arthur's accident. Each discovery felt like another violation, proof of how deeply he'd embedded himself while planning our destruction. I returned to work gradually, my manager apologetic about reducing my hours based on Harley's lies. Coworkers who'd watched me suspiciously now offered support, understanding how isolation tactics worked to discredit victims. The bookstore became a refuge where I could exist without the weight of family drama. Dad's research into the accident that culled Harley's parents revealed the full tragedy. They'd been good people, teachers who dedicated their lives to helping children. Their death had shattered extended family, leaving Harley bouncing between reluctant relatives. The cycle of grief and destruction he'd perpetuated made more sense, though it didn't excuse his choices. Mom started attending a different grief support group, one with better screening processes. She met other parents who'd lost children, sharing Arthur's real story without Harley's filter. The honesty felt raw but necessary, acknowledging her son as he'd actually been, rather than anyone's idealized version. We learned Harley had been placed in a residential facility specializing in behavioral therapy. His pattern of targeting grieving families required intensive intervention. Part of me felt relief knowing he couldn't hurt others, while another part grieved the broken boy who'd chosen revenge over healing. The house gradually returned to something resembling normal. Arthur's music played again without triggering Harley's performed emotions. His photos came out of storage, displayed honestly rather than as props for false grief. We were learning to live with authentic loss rather than manufactured comfort. One evening, while sorting through Arthur's things, I found lyrics he'd written about family. Not the polished songs Harley had stolen, but rough drafts exploring complicated love and teenage frustration. They felt more honest than anything Harley had claimed to create, capturing the real brother I'd lost rather than anyone's convenient fiction. Mom and Dad began couples counseling to process how grief had made them vulnerable. They'd been so desperate to fill Arthur's absence that they'd invited a predator into our home. Working through that guilt while rebuilding trust became their primary focus. Some evenings I heard them talking quietly, voices heavy with regret but determined to heal. The memorial concert finally happened on a small scale. Just family and Arthur's real friends, gathered in our backyard to play his music. No scholarships or grand gestures, simply people who'd loved him sharing that love through song. It felt right in ways Harley's elaborate plans never could have. I kept the photos of Harley's notebook as reminders, not of his deception, but of my own strength in recognizing it. When authority figures had dismissed me, when my own parents doubted my sanity, I'd trusted my instincts and fought for truth. That knowledge became armor against future manipulation. Months later, we received notification that Harley had requested contact. The facility encouraged supervised communication as part of his treatment. We declined unanimously. Some bridges, once burned, couldn't be rebuilt. Our energy went toward healing our family, not enabling his continued presence in our lives. Arthur's room became a music space again. Not a shrine, but a functional area where Dad played guitar badly and Mom attempted piano. They were learning instruments Arthur had tried teaching them, connecting with his memory through active participation rather than passive grief. I joined them sometimes. Our discordant noise, a joyful celebration of imperfection. The anniversary dinner became an annual tradition, reformed entirely. Each year we gathered with chosen family, sharing memories and music without performance or pretense. It honored not just my parents' marriage, but our survival as a family. Our ability to rebuild after deception nearly destroyed us. Looking back, I understood how Harley had succeeded initially. He'd offered my parents everything they wanted, a second chance, a perfect son, an escape from grief's brutal reality. But his fiction couldn't sustain itself against truth's persistent emergence. Love meant accepting loss, not replacing it with comfortable lies. Our family emerged different but stronger. We'd learned to recognize manipulation, to trust our instincts, to value authentic relationships over performed ones. Arthur's death still hurt, would always hurt, but we face that pain honestly now. No one could use our grief as a weapon again. I returned to school with new perspective, sharing my story when appropriate to help others recognize similar tactics. Not as a victim, but as someone who'd fought back against systematic deception and won. The label of troubled teen Harley had crafted fell away, replaced by recognition of my strength and persistence. In quiet moments, I wondered about Harley's future, whether therapy could address the pain driving his actions, if he'd ever acknowledge the harm he'd caused. But those thoughts passed quickly. My energy belonged to my own healing, my family's recovery, and honoring Arthur's genuine memory. The house felt peaceful finally, not because grief had ended, but because we'd stopped running from it. Arthur's absence remained, acknowledged and accepted, rather than masked by false comfort. We'd learned the hardest lesson, that love meant facing loss honestly, without shortcuts or substitutes. Our story spread quietly through the community, a cautionary tale about grief's vulnerabilities. Other families reached out, sharing similar experiences with manipulative individuals who'd exploited their pain. We became inadvertent advocates for careful screening, emotional boundaries, and trusting instincts over appearances. The final legal documents arrived on a Tuesday. Adoption nullified, inheritance restored, financial entanglements resolved. Paper proof that Harley's infiltration had been systematically undone. Mom filed them carefully. Another chapter closed in our long journey back to stability. I kept Arthur's guitar picks and demo recordings, no longer hidden but displayed proudly. They represented not just his memory but my fight to preserve it. Every time I saw them, I remembered my own strength when everyone else had doubted me. That knowledge became part of who I was going forward. Family dinners resumed their normal rhythm. We talked about school, work, daily concerns without the weight of performance or suspicion. Sometimes Arthur came up naturally in conversation, remembered with smiles and tears rather than competitive grief. The healing felt slow but genuine, built on truth rather than comfortable deception. 1 year after Harley's removal, we held a proper memorial for Arthur. Just family and close friends, sharing real memories of an imperfect but loved teenager. No stolen songs or false collaborations, only authentic stories about the brother, son, and friend we'd lost. It felt like the goodbye we'd needed all along. The experience changed us fundamentally. We'd learned how grief could create vulnerability, how desperate pain could override judgment. But we'd also discovered our own resilience, our ability to recognize truth even when it hurt. Those lessons shaped how we moved forward, more cautious but ultimately stronger. I graduated high school with plans for college, my future no longer overshadowed by family drama. The guidance counselor who'd once dismissed my concerns wrote recommendation letters praising my persistence and integrity. Small vindications that mattered more than I'd expected. Our home found new rhythms. Dad played Arthur's guitar badly but enthusiastically. Mom learned to cook his favorite meals, honoring memory through action. I shared his music with friends who'd never met him, keeping his creativity alive in authentic ways. We were a family again, scarred but healing. The last photo of Harley disappeared from our walls during spring cleaning, not dramatically, just quietly removed and discarded. His presence in our lives reduced to a cautionary memory, a reminder of how pain could be weaponized by those who refused to process their own grief healthily. We never forgot the lesson he'd taught us through deception. That grief required facing, not replacing. That love meant accepting loss, not finding substitutes. That family bonds could survive truth but not comfortable lies. Hard wisdom earned through months of manipulation and the fight to expose it. Arthur's music lived on through the people who'd actually known him. His band recorded some of his songs properly, crediting him fully, not for profit or fame, just to preserve what he'd created. The authenticity Harley had tried to steal, restored to its rightful place. Our family story became one of survival and truth, not the fairy tale Harley had crafted, but something more valuable. Proof that love could endure deception, that truth would emerge despite elaborate lies, that grieving families could heal without false comfort. We'd learn to live with honest loss, the most difficult but necessary lesson of all.